Hey guys, tonight we step into the damp, chill breath of a Korean mountain morning, in a century when every gnarled root of ginseng was worth enough silver to tempt thieves, kings, and wandering tigers alike. You're up before the roosters even think about complaining, your body still clinging to the memory of warmth from the floor-heated Andal room. The sky is a deep blue ink, fading at the horizon into the first shy blush of dawn. Your breath comes out in small white clouds. Somewhere out there, past the dark outline of the pine-cloaked ridges, is your quarry, Panax ginseng, the root of life. The plant that might buy you rice for the winter, if you survive finding it. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments, where are you right now, and what's the local time? I love seeing who's listening from halfway across the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shoulder the woven pack, the weight oddly comforting even though it's empty, and head out into the early mist. The path is just a dirt ribbon between rice paddies still wet from night dew, and every step squelches faintly. Above the terraces, the land tilts upward into low hills, and beyond that, jagged, mist-draped peaks where the royal ginseng grows. The climb is slow, you're still half asleep, and the air smells of damp pine needles and earth. There's no rushing this. Ginseng isn't like mushrooms or wild greens, you can't just pluck it and be done. The plant takes years to mature, and a root harvested too soon is barely worth the trouble. That's why the government of the Joseon dynasty keeps a jealous grip on where it's found. Historians still argue whether these tight controls were more about protecting the plant or about keeping commoners dependent on palace favor. Either way, if you're caught poaching from royal-designated hills, you'll wish a tiger had gotten to you first. By the time you reach the foothills, the sun has started peeking between clouds, lighting up the spider webs strung across tall grasses like delicate nets of silver. You pause, rubbing your hands to keep the feeling in your fingers. The elders in your village say the best pickers can smell ginseng before they see it, a sweet, earthy scent that cuts through the smell of pine. You have yet to develop that magical nose. Still, you've learned a few tricks. Look for the plant's distinctive whorl of 5 leaflets, never 4, never 6, each with a fine serrated edge. The older plants have a single stalk with a spray of red berries in summer, but in early spring, it's just the green leaves, easy to mistake for dozens of other forest plants. The real test is the root beneath, and that's the part that makes your back ache just thinking about it. A movement catches your eye, a flash of white tail disappearing into the trees. Deer. Good omen, supposedly. In ginseng lore, deer are the messengers of the mountain spirits, guiding those who respect nature and misleading the greedy. It's a nice thought, though you suspect the deer just wants breakfast. Your boots sink slightly into soft, dark soil as you climb higher. The air thins and the mist shifts, revealing slopes tangled with undergrowth. Every so often, you spot a promising sprout, kneel to inspect it, and find it's nothing but baneberry or wild sarsaparilla, mocking you. The forest is full of false friends. As you trudge on, the quiet is broken by the faint knock of woodpeckers and the distant gurgle of a hidden stream. You've got to keep moving. Sunlight is both friend and enemy. It helps you see, but it also burns away the cool dampness that ginseng likes, making the plants droop and harder to spot. Somewhere above, the slopes will get steeper, rockier, and less forgiving. That's where the best roots hide, far from easy paths, in soil no farmer's spade has touched. The climb will be brutal, but the reward, well, reward is relative. Your share, after taxes, might be just enough for a new pair of straw sandals and a few extra measures of rice. Still, that's the gamble every picker takes. And as the sun edges higher, you feel the first bead of sweat slide down your temple, a reminder that the day has barely begun. The path narrows as you leave the last of the foothill farms behind, swallowed by the deep shade of the pine and oak forest. The air grows cooler, damper, tinged with the faint musk of leaf mold. You pull your jacket tighter and shift the strap of your pack so it doesn't dig into your shoulder. Somewhere ahead, beyond a few ridgelines, lies the heart of the royal Ginseng territory. And with it, the reason for your growing unease. This is tiger country. You've heard the stories since you were old enough to toddle. Stripes sliding silently through the ferns, a golden glare in the undergrowth, a low chuff that sounds almost like a sigh before the rush. They say the Siberian tiger can weigh as much as 3 men and leap far enough to cross a stream without getting its belly wet. Historians still argue whether the tigers of Joseon Korea were truly as numerous as the old tales claim, or whether memory and fear multiplied them in the retelling. But standing here, with the forest pressing in on all sides, you feel those arguments are for people safely back in the capital. The official line from the royal overseers is that tigers keep the unlicensed pickers away. Fewer poachers, fewer ginseng thieves. But for you, they're not a policy. They're a potential end to your career and your pulse in one neat bite. That's why you carry a short, broad-bladed hatchet at your belt. It's good for clearing brambles, cutting firewood, and, at least in theory, making a tiger think twice. You step carefully, because the terrain changes without warning. A bed of pine needles gives way to slick moss on stone, and the incline steepens until you're leaning forward, grabbing roots and low branches to keep from sliding back. Every footstep is a small negotiation. Don't make too much noise, but don't move so quietly that a predator mistakes you for prey. Somewhere to your left, a pheasant explodes from the brush in a clatter of wings, sending your heart thudding against your ribs. You laugh under your breath, shaky but relieved. Better to be startled by a bird than by something with fangs. The overseers told you this section of the forest is one of the last untouched zones, where the soil is deep and the ginseng grows slow and potent. The roots here can be decades old, each ring of age adding value in the apothecaries of Hanyang. One of them might fetch enough to buy a cow, if you were insane enough to try selling it outside the royal monopoly. But you aren't. Or at least, you tell yourself you aren't. The deeper you go, the more you notice signs of other travelers. Not people, no boot prints, but claw marks on tree trunks, deep and parallel, a warning left in plain sight. Tigers don't just hunt, they announce themselves to other tigers. You spot a tuft of coarse orange hair snagged on a low branch, swaying slightly in the breeze. You leave it where it is. Still, the mountains aren't just danger. They're alive in ways the lowlands aren't. A squirrel darts along a branch overhead, scolding you for intruding. The sun breaks through in patches, lighting up tiny wildflowers, violet, yellow, white, scattered among the ferns. You notice how quiet it gets between bird calls, the kind of hush that makes you hold your breath without realizing it. There's an unspoken rule among pickers: you never wander alone in this territory unless you have to, and when you do, you keep your route in mind as if your life depends on it, because it does. The forest is a maze of ridges and gullies, each one looking like the last, and if you lose track of where you came from, you might walk in circles until nightfall. And nightfall here isn't just darkness. It's the time when the deer vanish into hiding, the birds settle into silence, and the apex predators begin their shift. You know you'll have to be well out of the deep slopes before that happens. For now, though, the trail ahead climbs toward a rocky outcrop, where you'll get your first glimpse of the day's hunting grounds for ginseng, and hopefully, not of anything hunting you. You adjust your grip on the walking stick, take a deep breath, and push upward into the unknown. By the time you crest the rocky outcrop, your calves burn like you've been running uphill for hours, which, to be fair, you have, just with more tree roots in the way. The view opens suddenly, and you get your first look at the day's challenge spread out below, a tangled green quilt of undergrowth, sloping downward into folds and ravines where mist still clings like forgotten laundry. Somewhere in that sea of leaves are the telltale 5-pointed crowns of wild ginseng, each one hiding a root worth more than its weight in silver. The art of root spotting is part skill, part obsession, and part sheer stubbornness. To an untrained eye, everything here looks the same: ferns, young saplings, weeds that have mastered the art of looking important. But you've learned to read the forest like a slow-moving puzzle. The leaves of Panax ginseng are a soft green, slightly matte, never glossy. The stalk grows straight and deliberate, not wavering like some of its impostors. In summer, the red berries make the plant pop like a painted bead, but now, early in the season, you have to work with shape, posture, and instinct. You crouch low, scanning the ground in small arcs, moving your eyes more than your neck. Every so often you freeze, narrowing in on a candidate. Your fingers hover just above the leaves, tracing the shape without touching, because one touch is enough to bruise and weaken the plant. It's like recognizing a face in a crowd. The more you practice, the faster your mind goes that one. There's an old superstition among seasoned pickers: never speak the plant's name when you think you've found it. The mountain spirits, they say, will hear you and hide it away out of spite. So instead, you think of them in nicknames. Old Five-Finger, or Grandfather Root. It sounds silly, but after a long morning with no finds, you start muttering anything that might help. Historians still argue whether these folk beliefs were genuine spiritual practice or just a way to keep outsiders confused about real picking techniques. Either way, you're not about to tempt fate by saying the actual word out loud. Your first false positive of the day comes quick: a perfect 5-leaf cluster, in the exact kind of shady, moist soil ginseng prefers. You lean in, heart ticking faster, only to find the stem too stiff and the root bulb tiny, no bigger than a quail's egg. False ginseng. You sigh, stand up, and keep moving, mentally adding another tally to the plants that have wasted my time list. The real secret, you've learned, is to train your peripheral vision. Ginseng often grows alone or in small family clusters, and if you're staring directly at the ground, you can miss the subtle pattern in how they space themselves. Some say they mimic stars, scattered but deliberate, each one holding its own pocket of earth. And here's the kicker: even when you do find a perfect specimen, you have to stop and think, how old is it? A root under 6 years isn't worth digging, not in royal territory where the overseers measure the neck of the root to estimate age. Too young, and you've just wasted your effort and risked a fine. Too old, and the plant might be gnarled deep in the soil, nearly impossible to free without breaking it. As the sun climbs higher, the light sharpens and makes the search harder. Shadows shrink, contrast flattens, and every green looks the same shade. You push into a patch where the canopy is thick enough to keep the forest floor dim and moist. Here, the air smells faintly sweet under the pine, and you slow your pace. And then, you see it. The leaves are just the right texture, the stalk slender but steady, and a faint tilt toward the light tells you it's been here for years. You squat, steady your breathing, and commit its position to memory. This is where the next stage begins, the delicate art of digging without damaging. But for now, you just hover there for a moment, savoring the small victory of the find. In a world where every step could lead to an empty patch or a tiger's shadow, spotting the real thing feels like a promise, fragile, but enough to keep you going. You ease your pack off your shoulders and let it rest against a moss-covered stone. This is the part where patience becomes more valuable than strength. Digging up ginseng isn't just about getting it out of the ground, it's about getting all of it out, intact, because the tiniest snap tendril can cut the root's value in half. And here, in the royal forests, overseers will notice every missing whisker. You kneel beside the plant, fingers brushing aside fallen leaves with the tenderness of someone uncovering a sleeping kitten. The soil is dark, damp, and spongy, giving off a scent like rain-soaked tea leaves. You pull your small digging tool from your belt, its blade dull enough not to slice the root, but narrow enough to work in the tight, stubborn earth. The first trick is to start wide. You carve a shallow circle in the soil at least a handspan from the stalk, working slowly, almost lazily, so the earth doesn't collapse inward. The roots of ginseng twist unpredictably, often reaching down before curling sideways like a question mark. Snap one, and the market price will drop so fast you'll wish you'd left it in the ground. A bead of sweat slips down your nose as you work. Somewhere above you, a woodpecker drums a lazy rhythm, like it's keeping time with your slow excavations. Historians still argue whether the Joseon court's strict harvesting protocols were purely economic or had ceremonial undertones. There are records of ginseng roots being presented in lacquer boxes as tribute, each one inspected like a jewel. The soil grows looser as you scrape away layers, and you switch to using your hands. Fingertips feel for the knotted texture of the main body, brushing off clumps of earth to reveal pale, wrinkled skin that almost looks human in its folds. That resemblance is no accident in local lore. The plant's humanoid shape is why it's believed to hold life-giving energy. In the apothecaries of Hanyang, a root shaped like a person is prized above all, sometimes even preserved in glass jars for display before it's ground into medicine. You follow the main root downward, tracing each thin side root with the care of untangling hair. Your knees are beginning to complain from kneeling on rock-laced soil, but you ignore them. A single careless tug could undo the last 20 minutes. And then comes the most dangerous part, lifting. You loosen the last bit of earth beneath, slide both hands in, and gently rock the root free, coaxing it upward. It resists for a moment, always does, before sliding into the light, a pale figure curled like it's been sleeping for decades. You cradle it in your palms, brushing away the last crumbs of dirt. It's beautiful in the way only something hard-won can be. Not huge, maybe 7 years old, but intact from crown to whisker tip. You set it gently into a small paper-lined pouch, folding the edges over like tucking in a child. There's a moment of quiet satisfaction, the kind that's almost dangerous. You've learned never to linger too long in pride. It makes you careless. You stand, stretching your back until it pops, and glance around. The forest feels the same, cool shadows, rustling leaves. But you've marked this spot in your memory. Ginseng often grows in families, and where there's one, there might be more nearby. Of course, there's the flip side. A cluster means you'll be crouched here for hours, hands buried in the earth, while every sound in the underbrush makes you wonder if you're about to be pounced on. Still, you shoulder your pack again and scan the ground in widening circles, letting your eyes hunt for the next flash of familiar green in the endless variations of the forest floor. You've done the hardest part once today, but the mountains aren't finished testing you yet. The forest shifts from wild to watched without a visible border. No stone marker, no painted post, just a prickle on your neck that says you're not the only one counting your breaths. A thrush calls twice, and then you hear it, the soft clack of bamboo against bamboo, a signal stick tapped in a pattern that means, present your bundle. You straighten, brush dirt from your knees, and try to look like the kind of person who always digs legally and never, ever pockets a bonus root for later. They step from the trees the way rain steps from a cloud, suddenly and everywhere. Royal agents in quilted coats, conical hats beaded with mist, short bows slung but unstrung, and writing kits hanging from their belts like talismans of paperwork. Their leader is not large, but he has that particular mountain stillness that makes him seem taller. He nods once at your pack. You unfasten the ties with fingers that feel strangely loud. The inspection is a choreography the hills know by heart. The agent lifts your paper-lined pouch as if it were an egg he intends to return to its nest. He does not touch the root directly. He uses a thin bamboo pick to coax it into view, eyes narrowing with a craftsman's attention. He measures the neck with a little notched ruler, counts the gross scars, and then, because this is bureaucracy, not poetry, he makes a tiny dot with vermilion ink on your pouch flap and notes it in his ledger. If you blink, you'll miss the faint smile that means your first root of the day passes muster. Mainstream fact time, delivered gently so your pulse comes back. The Joseon state kept a tight monopoly on wild ginseng from certain mountain districts, regulating who could harvest, when they could harvest, and where those roots would go once they left the soil. Overseers like these weren't myth. They were the living border between honest picker and poacher, a line some crossed at great risk. You remind yourself which side you're on. The side without fines, ideally. He asks your name, village, and the path you took. You offer polite answers, careful not to seem rehearsed. He asks about tigers. You try a joke about preferring your predator striped rather than paper-capped. He does not laugh. That's fine, his assistant does, which earns the assistant a look that could shave wood. You add humor to the list of things you'll keep in the pouch next time. They move you to a clearing set up like a traveling office, a folding table, a balance scale, a tin of red seals, and a hemp rope strung between two saplings where paper tags flutter like pale moths. Each tag is a promise, weight, estimated age, and the day's marker, all tied to a picker's name. If the mountains are a maze, this is the exit gate. You hand over today's prize. The agent weighs it, nods, and writes with neat, almost tender strokes. The tag joins the others, whispering in the breeze. Here's your quirky tidbit, the kind that sounds like a traveler's tale but shows up in more than one memory. Some overseers swore by a test where they bounced a root gently on the back of the hand. Too springy meant too young, too stiff meant too dried, just right landed with a dignified, elderly thud. You watch for the bounce and yes, the leader gives your root a tiny tap. It lands with the world-weary gravitas of a scholar who's read too many memorials. You try not to grin. Of course, not everything about today's process is ancient wisdom. There's also the dull, relentless rhythm of state record-keeping. The assistant counts aloud as he tallies the day's tags. 1, 2, 3, you're lonely 4, then threads them on a cord knotted by district. A portable chest sits open, its compartments labeled with brush characters, ready to swallow your work until it's marched down the mountain to the main storehouse. Somewhere far away, an apothecary will slice and steam the finer roots until they blush into red ginseng, destined for court prescriptions and lofty gift exchanges. Whether that steamer is for medicine, status, or both? Historians still argue whether the red ginseng vogue in certain reigns had more to do with genuine therapeutic preference, or a fashionable palate for scarlet prestige. You sign your name beside the tally mark. Well, you attempt your best signature, which looks a little like a cricket slipped on ink. The agent pretends not to notice. He offers you a small twist of dried fish as a courtesy, which is both generous and exactly the morale snack you didn't know you needed. You reciprocate by sharing 2 pine nuts from your pocket. Somewhere in the universe, hospitality nods its approval. Staying on the ridge? He asks finally, eyes flicking toward the darker heart of the forest. You say yes, because that's where the older plants lurk, and also because saying no might invite an escort you can't afford. He studies your boots, the scuff on your hatchet, the dirt pressed into the half-moons of your nails. The quiet inventory of a man deciding if you belong here. Apparently you do, because he taps his signal stick twice and the others melt back into the trees, leaving only the ledger's red dot to prove they existed. You release a breath you didn't know you'd caged. The forest sighs with you. Even the thrush sounds less nosy. But their absence doesn't mean their presence has ended. In royal territory, supervision is a weather pattern, not a moment. Somewhere, someone is listening for the scrape of a spade too near a forbidden patch, or for voices trading prices that should never be spoken aloud. You adjust your pack straps and set off along the ridge, more careful now, because nothing ruins a good day like forgetting it's being watched. You pass a coppice where the soil looks trampled in a tidy, curious way. Other pickers paused here, knelt here, decided against digging here. Etiquette, unspoken but iron, says you don't pry. If someone left a plant to mature another year, you honor that choice. Break that rule and the forest has 1,000 tongues. The next overseer will ask pointed questions you don't want to answer. A breeze lifts, threading the resin scent of pine with something honeyed and faintly medicinal. You swear you can taste it at the back of your throat. You lick your lips and mutter, not the plant's true name, but one of those safe nicknames. Old Five-Finger, Mountain Doll, Little Grandfather. Because superstition travels lighter than fear. By midday the mist has burned off, and the sun paints bright lances on the duff. You find a shadowed nook to sip water and study the slope. Your mind drifts, unhelpfully but honestly, to the market stories. A single, man-shaped root traded for a horse. A silver coin that clinked like a bell inside a wine cup. You push the thoughts away. You cannot spend stories. You can only keep digging. Besides, remember the agent's ledger? It has a long memory and an excellent appetite. 3 light jokes quota? Let's check your pockets. First, you tell yourself the overseer's ruler is keener than a tiger's tooth. Both measure you, but one lets you keep measuring tomorrow. Second, you resolve to laugh later about how your signature looks like a startled centipede. That one's free. Third, you promise your aching knees a promotion to management if they get you through the afternoon. They decline, knees prefer middle management. When you rise, the ridge seems to lean forward, inviting or warning, you can't tell which. The agents may be out of sight, but the mountain has given you a pass for the moment, and passes are meant to be used. You tighten the knot on your hat, take your stick, and step back into the maze, careful and quiet, under the memory of the red dot, and the knowledge that every route today is both a blessing and an entry in someone else's book. The ridge begins to dip into a gentler slope, and with it comes the low murmur of other voices, familiar, cautious, the kind that carry only as far as the speaker intends. You're not alone in the hunt, though you've known that since dawn. No one says it outright, but every picker feels the weight of invisible lines drawn through the forest, lines made of respect, rivalry, and the occasional, accidental, detour sent your way by someone who doesn't mind if you waste an hour in the wrong patch. You round a cluster of azaleas in bloom, their petals a pink so bright they almost look guilty, and see 2 fellow pickers squatting in the leaf litter. They nod a greeting without standing. Friendliness here is measured in how little you interrupt the other's work. You give a quick bow, then veer wide, careful not to even glance at the soil they're working. In the unspoken code of foraging etiquette, to look too closely is to suggest you're planning to come back later and revisit the spot. Historians still argue whether these field courtesies emerged organically among commoners or were subtly encouraged by the royal administration to keep pickers from openly fighting. Either way, breaking them is a surefire way to earn yourself a reputation that follows you down every mountain path. Competition, of course, isn't always so polite. There are the harmless tricks. Someone might, accidentally, tell you they saw a patch just over the ridge, conveniently in the opposite direction from where they're headed. There are the less harmless ones, loosely covered false trails that lead straight into thickets of brambles or across rocky gullies where you're guaranteed to twist an ankle. You've learned to take every tip with the same seasoning as dried fish. Chew carefully and don't swallow the bones. Once, a man from a neighboring village tried to shadow you all morning, staying just far enough back to avoid confrontation but close enough to note where you paused. You lost him by looping through a stream bed, stepping from rock to rock until your trail vanished in the water. It cost you time, but saved you from handing over your best find without a word. Quirky tidbit? Some old hands swear by rubbing pine resin on their boots to leave a misleading scent trail, supposedly enough to throw off both people and certain animals. You haven't tried it, but you like the image of a wild boar following the scent of tree sap into confusion. Today, the competition is subdued. Maybe the overseers have been making more rounds, or maybe the early season means everyone's still holding out for older roots. Still, you notice a man about your age watching you from further up the slope. His hat hides his eyes, but his posture tilts toward interest. You give him a slow nod, the neutral kind that says, "I see you," and that's all. Mid-morning brings you to a narrow saddle between 2 rises. It's a good vantage point, so you drop your pack and rest a moment. Below, in a shaded hollow, 3 pickers are working in a triangle, each with a neat patch of soil before them. They aren't talking, but their movements are a conversation, leaning left or right to avoid each other's elbows, passing a water flask without glancing up. That's the ideal, shared space without shared spoils. It's easy to forget, in the careful politeness of the day-to-day, that this work used to be far rougher. A few generations ago, when enforcement was looser and the value of ginseng even higher, there were stories of fights breaking out over single plants, of tools turned to weapons. Those days are mostly gone, but the memory lingers in the way pickers move around each other now, measured, distant, like dancers in a slow, tense performance. You shoulder your pack again and move on, the air growing warmer as the sun tips toward noon. Somewhere ahead is a promising slope you scouted last year but left untouched. The roots there should be older now, thicker, and worth the climb. Of course, you have to get there without anyone else catching your direction. You zigzag through a stand of young birch, letting the white trunks break up your silhouette. By the time you reach the slope, you've lost sight of the other pickers entirely. Just you, the whisper of wind through the canopy, and the faint ache in your legs reminding you that this game is part treasure hunt, part endurance test. You kneel to start scanning, keeping your ears open, not just for tigers, but for footsteps that might be trailing yours. In this work, both can strip your prize away, and only one of them will bother to growl first. By midday, the forest has settled into that strange balance of light and shadow where everything feels older than it is. The air is warm but not oppressive, carrying the resin-sweet scent of pine needles baking in the sun. You're moving slower now, not because you're tired, though your legs might have a different opinion, but because you've wandered into a part of the ridge where the old stories breathe a little closer to the ground. Here, the ginseng isn't just a plant. It's a thing of lore, a treasure guarded by forces you can't measure with rulers or ledgers. You stop by a fallen cedar, its roots torn from the soil like the fingers of a giant hand, and remember the elders' warnings: never pick from a patch too rich, too perfect, or too quiet. That's where the Sanson, the mountain spirit, keeps their watch. Historians still argue whether belief in such guardians was rooted in shamanic traditions, Confucian moralism, or just a convenient way to scare greedy hands away from overharvesting. But when you're alone in the hush of the high slopes, the debate doesn't matter much. You find yourself glancing at the shadows between trees, half expecting to see a robed figure with eyes like river stones. The superstitions run deep. Some say that the best ginseng can take human form, wandering the forest in disguise. If you meet a stranger here, one who never blinks, who asks you no questions but tells you exactly where to dig, you're supposed to leave at once. Accept their guidance, and you'll either never find your way home, or you'll find nothing but roots that crumble to dust when touched. A quirky tidbit? A few pickers claim to have once followed a red-clad child into the brush, only to stumble out hours later with empty hands and the sun already sinking. None of them can explain how far they walked. You pass a mossy boulder with a streak of red berries spilling down its side. Not ginseng, just a cluster of partridgeberry, but the sight makes you uneasy. You skirt wide, giving the rock the same respect you would a marked grave. Some traditions are more practical. There's a habit of leaving 3 grains of rice at the base of the first root you dig each day, a small offering to the earth. You've done it often enough to make it automatic, slipping a pinch from your lunch gourd before tucking the root away. The gesture doesn't cost much, and if it keeps your luck from turning, all the better. Still, the line between reverence and paranoia blurs easily here. A bird's sudden silence can make you freeze, certain you've stepped into a place you don't belong. A breath of wind that dies too quickly can feel like the air itself is holding something back. You remind yourself that the mountains are full of natural quirks: temperature shifts, animal movements, the slow settling of the forest floor. But it's hard to shake the sense that someone, or something, is watching. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the superstition is just a way of remembering that you're not the only life here, and not the most important one either. It keeps you humble, keeps you careful. You adjust your path, circling toward a patch where the undergrowth thins, letting the old beliefs guide your steps without fully admitting they do. When you find your next plant, it's in a place so perfectly balanced, dappled light, rich soil, just enough slope for drainage, that you almost laugh. If the spirits are real, they have a sense of humor. You kneel, offer your rice, and start to dig, slow and steady, all the while keeping your peripheral vision tuned for the flicker of something red or white moving through the trees. Because in these hills, luck and caution are two sides of the same leaf, and you're not quite ready to find out what happens when you turn it over. Your stomach tells time better than any sundial. It's somewhere between the overseer's red dot and the tiger you'd prefer not to meet, and it insists, politely at first, then with small, indignant growls, that you stop. You pick a spot where the shade pools thick under a broad oak, set your pack down, and fold yourself onto a smooth root with a sigh that sounds like steam leaving a kettle. The mountain air tastes like resin and distant rain. Your mouth tastes like an argument you're having with hunger and losing. Lunch is what it always is, a gourd of rice. More barley than you care to admit this time of year, wrapped in cloth and still faintly warm from the morning's hearth, a side of kimchi that's gotten braver with age, and a sliver of dried fish the overseer's assistant pressed on you like a bureaucratic blessing. You pry open the rice with chopsticks, the grains sticking in satisfying clumps. It's not luxury, but it's honest fuel. Mainstream fact to chew with your mouth full. For most Josian folk, especially in lean months, rice, often meant a mix, barley, millet, sometimes beans, stretched to make the white grains last. Spring even had a grim nickname, the barley hump. But last year's stores thinned and this year's barley wasn't ready. You take a bite and think, yes, the hump and I are well acquainted. Your kimchi is sharp and clean, the kind you can smell before you taste. You think of the elders' stories about how, before chili peppers came through trade and took up permanent residence in everyone's crocks, pickles were pale, salted, sometimes brined with garlic and scallion, more winter clear than summer red. Historians still argue whether the fiery red kimchi became common in the late 17th or early 18th century, but your tongue votes in favor of the present. You chase it with a sip of stream-cooled water, which, today, could probably be marketed as tiger-adjacent mineral infusion. A mosquito settles on your wrist with the entitlement of a tax collector. You flick it away, then smear a crushed leaf of mugwort along your forearm, the scent bitter and clean. Quirky tidbit: some pickers swear by mugwort or pine needle rubs to keep the biting things at bay, and others tuck garlic in their belts as a charm against insects, spirits, and optimistically striped cats. You've tried them all. Results are mixed. The mosquitoes appear to have formed a union. You stretch your legs out and take stock. The straps of your pack have carved respectable grooves into your shoulders. Your calves hum with the steady complaint of an orchestra tuning up. Your straw sandals, gypsum, braided by your own hands over winter evenings, are already fretting themselves into questions at the heels. They mutter that they would like a word with management about terrain expectations. You promise them a repair tonight. They counter with hazard pay. Sandals are bold this year. You pull a small wooden pick from your pocket and loosen the grit from under your nails, the souvenir of several careful digs. That last root still sits in your pouch, paper folded around it like a sleeping child. You think of the rice you placed at the morning's first plant, 3 grains given, 300 taken in breath and effort. Somewhere behind you, a woodpecker ticks again, as if marking the minutes of your rest break for the overseer's ledger. You glance at the trees and remind yourself you're not being watched by anything with ink. Probably. The mountain eats energy. The climb alone is a steady tax on your breath, but the real work comes from the stances, knees bent, back curved, weight shifting between the balls of your feet as you hover above a potential plant, working the soil like a letter you're trying to open without tearing. After hours of that, your spine pretends it doesn't know you and refuses to make eye contact. You press your thumbs into the tight knots along your lower back and coax them into truce. You remember a trick from an older picker: foot care as religion. Before you set out each morning, you rub your soles with a dab of perilla oil, not fancy, just enough to soften skin and keep the blisters from turning into mutiny by noon. In the pack you carry a needle and thread. Pop a blister, run the thread through, tie off, let the string with the fluid while you walk. It sounds medieval because it is, but it works. Today, your big toe throbs where a rock pretended to be level ground. You consider the needle, then decide your future self can be brave later. Present you is on lunch. A squirrel scolds you from a branch, and then executes a daring leap to another tree, the forest's version of a middle manager demonstrating agility. You offer it a rice grain. It declines and suggests you move along. Everyone has notes. You eat the last of the fish, tough, salty, a square of willpower, and remember the overseer's bounds test, the elder's warning about a red-clad child that leads you astray, the deer flicker you took as an omen in the morning. It's a strange collage that makes up a ginseng day: state rules, mountain whispers, and the grinding arithmetic of your own body's limits. It would be funny if it weren't true. So you make it funny anyway. Joke 1. Your chopsticks, after a morning of digging, feel heavier. Clearly they've been promoted to shovels. Joke 2. If mugwort actually kept all pests away, the overseers would dab it on their ledgers and repel fraud. Joke 3. When you stand up after lunch, your knees perform a duet titled, "Why Did You Do This to Us?" in B minor. Between bites, you check your kit. The small dull-bladed spade for soil collar work, the bamboo probe for tracing whisker roots, the cloth pouches, the spare rope for sudden stream crossings, the twine cord for bundling a day's finds like scrolls. You run a finger along the spine of your hatchet, still sharp enough for brambles, not foolishly sharp for roots. Mainstream fact, slid in like a wedge under a stone: mountain carriers and pickers throughout Korea have long relied on clever, lightweight tools, bamboo poles, A-frame back racks called jige, to move goods across impossible slopes. You don't have a jige today. Ginseng rides small, not heavy, and you prefer to keep your silhouette narrow among the trees. The sun edges past its highest point, and heat schemes along the top of the canopy, turning the shade cool and glossy. You tidy your lunch things because the mountain has a memory for mess, and you'd rather it remember you as tidy. You refill your gourd at a trickling seam of water in a rock face, sipping carefully so your stomach doesn't stage a revolt at sudden generosity. On your way back to the oak, you notice a quicksilver flicker, dragonfly skimming the air like a tiny patrol boat, snatching the very mosquitoes that ignored your mugwort. You salute the dragonfly, the only overseer you enjoy. Before you shoulder the pack, you take a minute to resole your right sandal with a twist of straw pulled from the bundle you carry for precisely this purpose. The knob bites down, the sole firms, and you feel immediately less mortal. You also shake a little grit out of your sleeves. Soil gets everywhere, like rumor, and sticks just as well. There's a debate you turn over while you work, because thinking helps you forget your feet. Were pickers like you more often licensed freelancers scraping a living from state land, or semi-conscripted under corvée obligations when the court needed big harvests fast? Historians still argue whether those roles overlapped or shifted with rains and border pressures. On your end of history, the difference feels academic. The forest cares only that you've arrived, and the ledger cares only that you've brought something worth a red dot. You stand. Your body protests, but politely. Lunch has appeased it enough to keep the insurrection to murmurs. You cinch the pack, check the pouch where your morning's prize naps, and wipe your hands on your trousers. The air seems thinner, the sounds crisper, like the mountain has taken a long breath and is waiting to see what you'll do with the afternoon. You look down at the small circle of flattened leaves where you sat and, out of habit, scatter a few grains of rice at the base of the oak. A second, modest thanks. Then you step back into the dapple, past azalea flashes and the hush where birds pause between songs, and your search cadence returns. Scan, pause, test, breathe. The hardship doesn't lessen. You just wear it better. like a garment that's molded to your shape. Somewhere upslope, beyond a lace of ferns, a promising seam of soil darkens under a slant of shadow. You angle toward it, a little slower, a little smarter, hunger quieted, feet braced, jokes spent and ready to earn more. The ledger will have its say later. For now, the only numbers that matter are the count of leaves on a stalk and the careful tally of your next few breaths. The mountain decides you've had enough of comfort. The first warning is the shift in light. What was a soft, mottled dappling under the canopy turns flat and gray, as if the sky has suddenly decided to sulk. The second is the wind, no longer the gentle, resin-scented breeze from lunch, but a sharper current that smells like wet stone and distant thunder. You glance upslope, and the clouds are already gathering, dark as ink spilled across paper. Rain in these hills is a shapeshifter. Sometimes it's a mild, cooling drizzle you can work through with only a hood. Other times it comes in sideways, needling your skin, turning soil to soup and paths to streams. Historians still argue whether the seasonal weather patterns in the high ginseng districts shaped the short official harvest windows, or if the state merely claimed those dates to keep pickers under control. Either way, you know the rule. When the mountain closes its shutters, you either find cover fast or prepare to dig in wet misery. You tighten your hat cords and push forward. The leaf litter muffles your steps until the first raindrops start hitting it with a sound like 1,000 small hands clapping in uneven rhythm. The ground drinks greedily, releasing that unmistakable smell, earth and leaf mold waking up. At first, you think you can ride it out. You pull your outer wrap tighter, tucking the digging tool against your side. But the drizzle deepens, the drops growing heavier until the canopy can't keep up. Cold water snakes down your neck, and your sandals begin making that unpleasant squelch that tells you blisters are about to send formal complaints. There's a hollow ahead, half hidden by a leaning pine. You duck under its boughs, grateful for the extra cover, and crouch beside a rock shelf. The stone is slick and cool, with a trickle of water threading its face. You refill your gourd while you wait, even though the storm hasn't fully committed yet. Quirky tidbit: some pickers swear that rainwater caught fresh on stone tastes sweeter than any stream. You take a sip and, well, it's still water, but it has a certain clean edge that feels earned. The light dims further, and a low fog begins to creep between the trunks. It blurs the lines of the forest, making each tree look like it could be a shadow moving toward you. You force yourself to stay calm. Fog distorts sound as much as sight, and what you think is a distant deer might be a boar 10 paces away. Or nothing at all. The rain finally commits. Sheets of it crash through the leaves, the air suddenly cooler, the smell of pine sharp enough to taste. Your cloak holds out for maybe 3 minutes before surrendering. Water runs in cold rivulets down your spine. Mainstream fact: heavy rains in the ginseng regions were double trouble for pickers. Dangerous on the slopes and disastrous for unharvested plants, as too much water could rot roots before they were collected. You can't help but think about the plants still sleeping in the soil, their value melting away drop by drop. You try to work through it, spotting a likely sprout just a few paces away. The soil is already soft, and your fingers sink in with almost no effort, but that's the problem. The loosened earth collapses inward as you dig, swallowing the hole faster than you can clear it. It's a losing battle. You abandon the attempt before you damage the root beyond saving. Sometimes the mountain says no without words. The rain doesn't care about schedules. It drums on every surface, pooling in the folds of your trousers, turning your pack straps into wet ropes against your skin. The weight of damp clothes makes each movement feel heavier, and the slope underfoot starts to shift. Every step threatens to slide. You dig your stick in for balance, imagining the ledger entry if you fall. 1 picker, 0 roots, notable mud coverage. Historians might debate the why of weather rules, but every picker knows the how. In this state, you conserve energy. You find cover that won't wash out, you keep your tools close, and you wait for the storm to break before you risk the ridges again. You remind yourself of an elder's half-joke. The ginseng will still be here after the rain, but you might not be. After what feels like an hour, but is probably 20 minutes, the worst begins to ease. The downpour thins to fat drops that fall lazily, and the fog lifts enough to show the slope below. Everything glistens, leaves, moss, the delicate hairs on ferns. Somewhere, a frog begins to call, joined by another, then another, until the whole hollow feels alive with the sound. You step out from under the pine, your sandals heavy but your balance steady. The air is cooler now, washed clean, and every plant seems sharper in outline. This is the best time to search. The rain has flattened the smaller undergrowth, making the subtle five-leaf pattern easier to spot. The mountain, fickle as ever, has given you back a small advantage. You set off downslope, squelching but determined, scanning for that particular crown of leaves. The day may be soaked, but it's far from over. The forest after rain is a trickster's paradise. Everything glistens like it's been lacquered, and the smells are turned up to full volume: moss, wet bark, crushed ferns, and faintly, the earthy sweet scent you wish was ginseng but might just be wishful thinking. You tell yourself to focus, because this is when the hidden dangers step out from their hiding places, curious or cranky from the storm. The first hazard is almost charming: a line of ants marching single file across the exposed root of a tree, each one carrying a cargo of soggy leaf or prey twice its size. The second is less cute. You spot it in time, a greenish-brown coil in the undergrowth, just far enough from your boot to keep your pulse from turning into a drumbeat. A snake. It's still, tongue flicking to test the damp air. Historians still argue whether venomous snakes were a frequent danger for Josian pickers or more of a seasonal fluke, but you decide the academic debate is for people who aren't crouched within striking distance. You back up slowly, plant your stick between you and it, and take the long way around. A quirky tidbit floats to mind, courtesy of an older picker who claimed that scattering a few shavings of garlic on the ground would keep snakes away. You never tested it. You'd rather eat the garlic, but right now, you wonder if he might have been onto something. The path narrows as you descend, and the storm has left small gifts in its wake: slick leaves clumped together like traps, mud pockets deep enough to claim a sandal, and twigs sharp enough to jab straight through your straw sole if you're unlucky. You move slowly, scanning the ground not just for ginseng but for the things that don't want you here. Then you hear it, a grunt. Not human. Low, chesty, and followed by the crack of something heavy moving through underbrush. Your mind flips through the local fauna like a deck of cards: deer, too soft; bear, possible but rare here; wild boar, yes, unfortunately yes. And then you see the bristleback rising over the ferns, the twitch of an ear, the tusks like curved knives catching a stray beam of post-rain sunlight. Boar are less romantic than tigers, but far more likely to ruin your day. They're territorial, unpredictable, and they do not care about your red dot ledger dreams. Mainstream fact: wild boar populations in Korea have been both a food source and a hazard for centuries, often raiding crops in lowland villages and making mountain foraging a risky business. The boar hasn't spotted you yet, so you step back, slow and silent, until the fern's close between you. Your pulse is doing a fair imitation of a festival drum, but you keep moving uphill, circling wide. You know the rule: don't run unless you want to be chased, and don't get cornered unless you want to be tusked. By the time you reach a ridge spur, the grunt has faded, replaced by the steady chk of cicadas shaking off the storm. You breathe easier, though your legs feel like they're carrying an extra 10 pounds of tension. You press on, hyper-aware now of every rustle. And just when you think the forest might let you have a stretch of peace, danger comes in a smaller package: hornets. You spot the nest hanging from a low branch, gray and papery, with a hole just big enough for the striped patrols zipping in and out. The rain has made them sluggish, but that won't last. You keep your distance, remembering the story of a picker who disturbed a nest while digging and ended up sprinting downhill, dropping his entire day's harvest to escape. 3 light jokes quota? Fine. 1. You mentally add "Boar Negotiator" to your growing resume of skills no one asked for. 2. The hornets remind you of overseers, hovering, territorial, and likely to sting your earnings if you get too close. 3. Your snake avoidance strategy feels so refined now you could probably teach a seminar called Step Back Slowly 101. You angle toward a more open stretch, where the canopy thins and sunlight spills in patches across moss-covered stone. The rain has cleared the air enough that you catch a faint, promising scent, earthy, sweet, medicinal. You follow it, moving with care, until you spot the telltale 5-leaf crown peeking through the flattened undergrowth. The soil is soft, the plant steady, and you manage to ease the root free without losing so much as a whisker. You tuck it into your pouch, double wrapping it against the damp, and glance around to make sure no snakes, boar, or buzzing bureaucrats are watching. The dangers might be hiding for now, but you know they'll be back. Still, for the moment, you're just a little richer, and a little more convinced that surviving a day out here is less about luck and more about noticing the trouble before it notices you. The rain-washed air has that crisp, post-storm clarity that makes every sound travel farther than it should. Which is how the conversation reaches you, thin as thread at first, then tightening into meaning as you edge along the ridge. 2 voices down in a shallow fold of the slope, hushed and careful, the kind of quiet that isn't about tigers. You pause behind a hazel shrub and listen without meaning to. You pick ginseng. You also pick up trouble if you're not careful. Man-shaped. 10 years at least, one says, breath quick with excitement. Not for the ledger. Not for the ledger means for the ledger's shadow, sold to a buyer who will never mark it in red ink. You stay still, rainwater dripping from your sleeve into the moss. There's a third voice, older, calmer. Wrap it in paper, then in oilcloth. The man from the market road comes at dusk. Your stomach does a soft, uneasy flip. You've heard stories, of course. Everyone has. The state has its monopoly on wild roots from these slopes, but value breeds ingenuity. Mainstream fact, sanded into place so it doesn't snag. For centuries, the Joseon court controlled ginseng production and trade, particularly the prized ginseng from northern districts, and the carefully processed red ginseng favored in high medicine and diplomacy. Laws, inspectors, seals, scheduled harvests, the entire machinery of a monopoly. Which is precisely why a single perfect root can slide off that machinery like water off lacquer and fetch a small private fortune. You shift your weight, and a wet leaf sighs under your sandal. The voices fall silent. You hold your breath, then offer the forest your best statue impression until a thrush chirps and the men resume. Dusk, the older one says again, then adds the part that tightens your jaw. If the agents ask, we found nothing. Historians still argue whether the black market for ginseng flourished mostly because rural pickers were desperate under rigid rules or because networks of officials quietly greased the skids, taking their share to look the other way. The debate sounds tidy in books. Up here, it sounds like risking your ribs. You let the voices fade before you move. The underbrush shivers as a chipmunk bolts, and you take the hint. Time to put distance between you and the conversation, because merely hearing it already puts you on a slope more treacherous than any slick rock. You climb toward a stony spur and find a seat, a flattish boulder warmed faintly under the brief banter of sun. Your pack rests beside you, honest weight, honest ache. The temptation is real. You picture it without wanting to, a root shaped like a tiny person, arms and legs suggested in the whorled skin, hair like whiskers intact, the kind of thing that would make an apothecary's hands tremble. You think of silver clinking into a palm, enough to buy new sandals for a year, enough to fix the roof before the monsoon, enough to turn barley rice into actual rice for a few blessed months. Then you remember the other picture, the color of jail walls, the particular tone of an overseer's voice when he lists penalties. The way your neighbors would not meet your eyes if your name traveled down the mountain on the wrong breath of news. You are not a saint, but you are not a fool. Still, you can feel the math scratching at the door of your mind. One perfect root versus a season of ledger dots and, thank you, come again. You close your eyes and let the mountain's background noise, drip, tick, whisper, wash over the numbers. There's a quirky tidbit the elders trade that feels less like advice than prophecy. Smugglers, they say, sometimes hollow a walking stick and slide a slender root inside, capped with resin, harmless wood outside, contraband life inside. Others stitch small pieces into the hems of coats, or hide them in bundles of medicinal bark whose smell masks everything else. Someone once told you about a man who swore by tucking a baby root into his topknot under his hat. That last bit sounds like a punchline delivered by a barber, but the image sticks, and annoyingly it's hard not to reach up and pat your hat just to make sure it's empty of ambition. You let yourself smile. Joke 1. If you hid a root in your topknot, the hornets from earlier would start a luxury haircare brand called Ginseng and regret. Joke 2. Your walking stick is many things: balance, company, percussion section. But if you hollowed it out, it would lodge a complaint with the Union of Sturdy Objects. Joke 3. The overseer's ruler would still measure the empty space inside your conscience, which, you suspect, is longer than a thumb. The breeze shifts, carrying the faintest trace of smoke from somewhere downslope. A cooking fire, probably. Or a signal. You wonder if there really is a man on the market road, and if he looks like a merchant should: soft hands, calm eyes, or like danger wearing a good hat. You've seen buyers in town before, lingering near the border of legal shops, their attention as heavy as an appraiser's gaze. They always seem to know whose pouches are heavier than their ledger lines. You drink from your gourd and think practical thoughts until the dangerous ones loosen their grip. Practical. The overseers have stepped up spot checks since last season. You can hear their bamboo taps echoing more often through the trees. Practical. You have 2 decent roots, intact, both red dottable, and with care you might add a third before dusk. Practical. Your roof actually does need fixing, but roofs prefer money from legal mountains. Illegal money makes tiles slide at night. That's not physics. That's superstition dressed as engineering, but you respect both costumes. You stand and take stock of the slope to the west. It's less trampled, a good sign. You angle that way, letting brush hide you until the ridge turns and the wind steals whatever trace of your eavesdropping remains. As you walk, you mentally rehearse the lines you'd use if anyone asked where you've been. Upper spur, after the storm. And, truthfully, found nothing in the hollow. The second part will be particularly true if you keep your feet moving. The forest starts offering you its usual puzzles again. A maybe ginseng that becomes nothing, a nothing that becomes a maybe, and then a steady, small yes that rewards patience. You kneel, hands working the damp earth with that slow, circular care you've practiced all day. The root comes free like a story told well. No breaks, clean ending, a little flourish in its curling tip. You brush it, wrap it, tuck it into the paper cradle, and press the fold down with a thumb that still remembers the ledger's neat red dot from morning. On your way to a new patch, you run a quiet inventory of your ethics and, more importantly, your exit routes. You plan to pass near the overseer's clearing on your way down. Not to show off, just to let the red ink keep doing what it does best: exist on paper, not on your conscience. You murmur one of your safe nicknames to the plant you didn't dig earlier: Little Grandfather, Old Five-Finger, and scatter 3 grains of rice to the place where the men were talking. A small charm against other people's choices. Or your own, if the day gets weird. Because it might. Dusk on these mountains is a trickster, too. The buyer might exist, or he might be a whisper that hooks the greedy and reels them into trouble. Historians still argue whether the worst crackdowns actually curbed smuggling or just polished it until it looked like legitimate trade wearing new paperwork. You have no desire to be a footnote in that debate. You make yourself a promise so plain you almost laugh. Today you will go home with roots and without stories. Roots spend. Stories spill. If anyone asks what you heard, you will say the truth that matters. The frogs sang after the storm, the boar took a different path, the hornets minded their own kingdom, and you did your work under the rules that let you sleep. The path ahead tilts towards shadow. You shift your pack, feel the quiet pride of the paper pouches settling against each other, and let your feet choose careful steps. The mountain has given you a day full of tests and a handful of answers. You plan to hand those answers, neatly wrapped, to the men with the bamboo rulers, and to go home with your name exactly as you brought it. By the time the sun starts folding itself behind the ridges, the air takes on that strange, weightless chill that means the forest is switching shifts. The daytime chorus, cicadas, small birds, the chatter of squirrels, fades, replaced by longer pauses between sounds. You know this rhythm well. It's the lull before the night creatures clock in. And here, night isn't just an absence of light, it's a change in the rules. You slow your pace, partly to keep quiet and partly because the ground has become treacherous in the dimming light. The soil is still damp from the storm, and roots rise like knotted ropes under your sandals. The canopy above filters what's left of the sun into narrow bands that sway as the breeze stirs. It's beautiful, but it also makes your instincts start to whisper, find your camp, or find the path home. You decide to rest and weigh your options. There's a narrow shelf of rock just off the slope, sheltered on three sides by thick rhododendron. From here, you can see a ribbon of mist threading between the lower hills. You drop your pack and let your shoulders exhale. The forest smells different now, cooler, sharper, tinged with the faint musk of animals you'd prefer not to meet. Mainstream fact, in the mountains of the Korean peninsula, even well into the Joseon period, overnight stays in remote foraging areas were risky but sometimes unavoidable. Pickers caught far from the village might fashion makeshift lean-tos, hang food from trees to keep it out of boar reach, and keep small fires for warmth and protection. But every fire is also a beacon, and in royal Ginseng territory, a beacon can attract the wrong sort of attention, human or otherwise. You've heard stories of people who ignored that rule. One quirky tidbit says that if a tiger catches sight of your fire, it will circle you silently 3 times before deciding whether to leave you be, or to step into the light. No one seems to know if the detail about 3 times is folklore or field observation, but no one you know has been eager to test it. You decide on no fire tonight. The air isn't cold enough to make you shiver, and the moon, once it clears the ridge, will give you just enough to work with. Instead, you eat a few mouthfuls of leftover rice, wash down with a careful sip from your gourd, and tuck your pouch of ginseng roots into the inner fold of your jacket. They're worth enough to guard like treasure, but not so much that you want to tempt whatever roams after dark. The forest soundscape shifts again. A deep, distant hoot owl. The scritch of something small moving through the underbrush, probably a mouse. And then, somewhere far off, a noise like a cough wrapped in a growl. You freeze, the hair at your nape prickling. Could be a leopard. Could be a tiger. Could be your imagination, which at this hour is both highly creative and deeply unhelpful. You think of the overseers, now likely back in their own camp, tallying red dot tags by lamplight. If they're close enough, their presence could be a deterrent to predators. If they're not, well, then you are just one more warm body in the ledger of the night. You wrap your cloak tighter and lower yourself against the rock wall, listening. The night deepens by degrees, shadows thickening until they merge. Moonlight eventually spills over the ridge, catching in the mist and turning it silver. The beam falls across your small clearing, illuminating your pack and your stick. It's a strangely peaceful moment, even with your nerves awake. 3 light jokes to keep your pulse company. 1. You tell yourself that if the boar from earlier shows up, you'll charge it a camp fee. 2. You imagine explaining to a tiger that you're not worth the effort because you're mostly barley. 3. You promise the mountain you'll leave an extra 3 grains of rice tomorrow if it lets you sleep undisturbed tonight. At some point, the sounds of the forest become a kind of white noise, and your body relaxes despite itself. You keep your hand on the stick, more for comfort than defense, and let your eyes close in short, guarded intervals. It's not a night for deep dreaming. It's a night for half hearing the forest breathe, for counting the time between an owl's call and its echo, for imagining that every rustle in the leaves is just wind and not something with claws. And when you do drift off, it's with the knowledge that dawn will come, whether or not you've slept, and with it, the last stretch of this long, unpredictable day. Dawn slips into the forest quietly, like it's trying not to wake the mountains. You feel it first as a softening of the air, a cool draft carrying the smell of wet pine and turned soil. Your eyes open to a pale wash of light, and for a moment you're not sure whether you've slept or just blinked for a very long time. The rock at your back is cold, your shoulders stiff, and your pack strap has left a deep crease in your side where you've been guarding it all night. The forest is in that fragile state between night and day, owls still calling faintly, the first sparrows testing out their voices. You hear the distant rush of a stream swollen from yesterday's rain, and below it, the faint murmur of movement, a reminder that you're not the only one up early. You push to your feet, stretch until your spine complains, and sling your pack into place. The last leg of your day is always the same, hauling whatever you've gathered down the mountain without losing your footing, your cargo, or your patience. Mainstream fact: for centuries, Korean mountain pickers, whether gathering ginseng, herbs, or fuel wood, used rope-tied bundles and jige, wooden A-frame carriers, to stabilize loads on steep trails. Even a small harvest feels heavier on the descent, when every step risks a slip. You check your pouches. 3 roots, 2 solid earners, one a little younger but still ledger-worthy. They're wrapped in paper that's slightly damp at the corners from last night's mist. You tuck them deeper inside, away from your body heat, and secure the flap. The trail is less a path now than a series of educated guesses. You follow the slope's natural contours, aiming for the faint depression where generations of boots have pressed the earth into a suggestion of direction. The morning fog lingers low, making the ground ahead vanish and reappear in intervals. The first hazard of the descent is the mud. Yesterday's rain left the soil slick, and the pine needles on top are like tiny, treacherous sleds underfoot. You plant your stick ahead of you with every step, letting it test the ground before you commit your weight. When you do slide, it's short and slow, more in dignity than danger, but you mutter at the hill as if it's doing it on purpose. Halfway down, you catch up with another picker, a man you recognize from the ridge yesterday, the one who'd given you that neutral nod. He's carrying a modest bundle, tied with hemp cord, and walking with the steady, knees-bent shuffle of someone who's done this too many times to be reckless. You trade a quiet greeting and fall into step behind him for a while. The etiquette is simple: keep your eyes on the trail, not on the other person's load, and match their pace unless they wave you past. A quirky tidbit to distract from the aching in your thighs: some pickers believe that whistling softly on the descent keeps your balance steady. Not because of magic, but because it forces you to breathe evenly, which keeps your steps measured. You try it now, 2 bars of an old harvest song your grandmother used to hum. It works, though you suspect your knees are just happy to think about something other than gravity. The fog begins to thin as you drop lower, and the forest opens into mixed growth, taller oaks and chestnuts replacing the tight pines. You pass a small shrine at a bend in the trail, a stack of stones with a weathered roof tile propped on top. Someone's left an offering, a dried persimmon, already soft from the damp. Historians still argue whether these mountain shrines originated purely from shamanic practice or became more common as Confucian values absorbed local customs. But in your experience, they've always been part of the landscape, as normal as a bend in the stream. You pause long enough to place a pine cone at the shrine's base, a small thank you for not being eaten, stung, or fined yesterday, and then keep moving. Near the lower slopes, the trail widens into a proper path, and you start to see signs of other travelers, fresh bootprints, A broken twig where someone's pack caught, the faint smell of wood smoke drifting uphill. You shift your pack's weight forward to protect the roots in case you stumble on the last stretch. 3 light jokes to pass the time. 1. If the mud keeps trying to steal your sandals, you're billing it for footwear rental. 2. Your knees have stopped arguing with your thighs and are now holding peace talks with your ankles. 3. The mountain should post a sign at the top. Going down? Good luck. When you finally reach the base, the land flattens into the edge of cultivated fields, bare now, waiting for planting. A narrow road snakes toward the Ginseng storehouse, its tiled roof just visible beyond a line of willows. The weight on your back feels heavier and lighter all at once, heavier from the climb down, lighter from knowing you've made it without mishap. The last thing between you and the storehouse is a shallow stream. The rain has filled it enough to make the stepping stones slick, so you take them slow, testing each with your stick before trusting your weight to it. On the far bank, you pause to wring a little water from the hem of your trousers, then straighten and head toward the building where the overseers will weigh your effort against their red dot ink. You adjust your pack one last time. The roots inside don't know they've made the journey, but you do, and so will the ledger by the time the day ends. The Ginseng storehouse looks almost modest from the outside, timber walls, tiled roof, no flashy ornament, but its quiet exterior hides the fact that what's inside is worth more than most villages see in a season. You step onto the packed earthyard, shaking off the last traces of mud from your sandals. The smell hits you first, a mix of dry wood, paper, and the faint, medicinal sweetness of hundreds of roots curing inside. 2 overseers sit cross-legged at a low table near the entrance, ledger books open, ink stones ready. A bamboo pole strung between posts serves as a queue line, though at this early hour you're one of the first to arrive from the mountain. You bow, step forward, and set your pack gently on the mat laid out for weighing. Mainstream fact: in the Josian monopoly system, every root from designated royal harvesting grounds had to pass through official hands. Overseers would inspect, measure, and sort each according to age and quality before sealing it for transport to larger depots or directly to the palace. Even a single whisker missing could affect classification, and with it your pay. The elder of the 2 overseers pulls on a pair of thin cotton gloves, more to keep his hands clean than to protect the roots. He opens your pouch carefully, as though unwrapping a fragile artifact. The first root earns a small, approving hum. He measures its neck with the same notched bamboo ruler you saw yesterday on the ridge, counting the gross scars with practiced eyes. 7 years, he says to his assistant, who writes the number neatly in the ledger. The second root is smaller but clean, no breaks. The third, your youngest, gets a longer pause. 5 years, he says, and there's the faintest tilt of his head, somewhere between indulgence and caution. The assistant notes it without comment. Then comes the sealing. Each root is wrapped in fresh paper, tied with a twist of hemp string, and tagged with a small rectangle of thin wood. On the tag, your name, village, the date, and the classification mark. The overseer stamps each tag with a red seal, the same crimson ink you've been chasing all day, and sets the roots in a shallow lacquered tray. The tray will be locked in a storage chest before nightfall. A quirky tidbit you've heard but never confirmed: some palace couriers used to carry the most valuable roots in specially padded chests strapped to their own backs, guarded by armed escorts. The idea wasn't just protection from thieves, but from accidental bruising during transport. You can imagine the tension, every step like balancing a fortune. Your earnings are calculated on the spot. The overseer hands you a folded slip showing the weight and value of your contribution, minus the standard deductions. It's not a fortune, but it's enough to matter, enough for rice, oil, maybe even a small repair to the roof before the summer storms. You bow again, slip the slip into your jacket, and step back from the table. As you leave, you pass a rack of drying tools, spades, bamboo probes, cloth pouches, set out by other pickers who've already reported in. Some stand in quiet clusters nearby, trading news in low voices. Which slopes looked promising, where the overseers seemed more watchful, who's thinking of trying again tomorrow. The undercurrent of rivalry is there, but muted now that the day's harvest is officially out of everyone's hands. Historians still argue whether the strict inspection process was more about quality control or about reinforcing the state's dominance over valuable natural resources. Standing here, you suspect it was both. The ritual of measurement and stamping makes the roots official, but it also makes you, briefly, a recognized part of a system much bigger than yourself. 3 light jokes on your way out. 1. You think the red seal might actually weigh more in pride than in ink. 2. You're certain the overseer's ruler has a secret notch just for making pickers nervous. 3. You promise your sandals a celebratory restraw if they make it back to the village without losing another soul. The road from the storehouse curves past the willows you saw from the ridge. Their long green strands sway over the water's edge, and for the first time all day, you let your shoulders drop. The hard part, the digging, the watching, the avoiding, has been replaced with the quieter work of simply getting home. Ahead, the fields spread out in neat lines, some already showing the first green tips of barley. Beyond them, the cluster of thatched roofs that marks your village waits in the late afternoon sun. The pack on your back is lighter now, but the day's weight is still in your legs, in the faint ache between your shoulders, in the soft hum of relief that comes when you've passed all the checkpoints that matter. You take a deep breath, tasting dust, wood smoke, and the faintest echo of pine from the hills behind you. The mountain will still be there tomorrow, and so will the rules. But for now, you're just a picker walking home with a day's work behind you and a little more than you had when you set out. Home looks smaller when you reach it with mountain legs. The village lanes are the same crooked threads they were yesterday, the thatch the same faded straw, but you feel taller, stretched by the climb and the worry and the careful joy of carrying roots that now sit sealed behind a storehouse door. Your door creaks the way it always does, politely, like an elder clearing their throat, and the warm breath of the Andal floor greets you as if to say, you survived another one. Barely, you think, and you smile at the floor as though it can hear. The first thing you do is lower the pack to the corner and let your shoulders remember what it is to be free. The second thing is water, plain, cool, a cup that tastes like rain and stone. You sip and feel the tension unspool thread by thread. Then you set to the little chores that make life look ordinary after a day that was anything but. You pick the mud from your sandals and trim a frayed straw with a fingernail. You lay out your tools on a cloth to dry, the dull-bladed spade, the bamboo probe, the hatchet that did more to reassure your courage than to threaten anything with teeth. There's a slow sweetness to the ritual. The spade still carries a trace of mountain dark in its seams, the bamboo smells faintly green, and the cloth pouches have that soft rustle of paper that survived rain and luck. You pause with the probe in your hand, remembering the exact give of the soil when it finally let go of your best root. You imagine the overseer's neat red dot again, small as a drop of plum wine, and you swear you can still hear the bamboo signal stick somewhere in the back of your skull. Supper is simple: barley rice, a ladle of broth, kimchi that bites your tongue just enough to feel alive. You eat slow and put your day in order while you chew. Tigers that politely stayed theoretical, boar that did not, hornets that buzzed like bureaucrats, a storm that almost rearranged your schedule, and possibly your vertebrae, and a fog that turned the world into a riddle. The ledger slip sits folded by the bowl, and you touch it between bites like a charm. It is not a fortune. It is not nothing. It is life's middle lane, and most days you can live with that. Mainstream fact to anchor the moment: Josie and Korea's ginseng didn't just feed households. It fed diplomacy. Bundled roots crossed borders as gifts and tribute, particularly once red ginseng became a court staple. Letters traveled with them like shadows. Somewhere beyond your roof and your bowl, that system still hums, steady as an old mill. Your 3 roots are small cogs in that machine. You picture them traveling in their paper jackets, bumping gently against lacquer, making their way toward a person who will never know your name, and will sleep better for it. There's a strange comfort in that exchange, a trade of your ache for someone else's remedy. You tidy away the bowls and bring out your needle and thread for the night's small repairs. Your right sandal gets the promissory straw, which it receives with the smug silence of footwear that knew you'd cave. You also check the seam of your pack where the strap bit into the weave. It will hold, but you reinforce it anyway. Historians still argue whether pickers like you were viewed as skilled specialists in the countryside or as merely one more set of hands obliged to the state's seasonal needs. Here, needle in hand, you vote for specialist. You can feel the day in your bones like a language. A quirky tidbit resurfaces while you stitch. Some mountain folk keep a sliver of ginseng, not the fancy stuff, just a thin shaving, tucked inside a family chest to guard the house's breath. Others mix powder into a celebratory rice cake after the first good harvest. You don't have slivers to spare, and you prefer your rice cakes unambitious, but you do press your palm flat on the warm ondal and imagine the floor quietly agreeing to keep your sleep stitched together. Sleep. The word arrives with weight. You blow out the lamp until the room is only outlines and familiarity. The low chest, the folded quilt, the beam with its hairline crack you've watched since childhood. Outside, a dog coughs once, decides the night is uninteresting, and lies back down. A neighbor's door sighs shut. Farther still, the river plays its endless song against stones, and the willows comb the evening as if tidying the day's loose ends. You lie down and feel every inch of the mountain express itself in your body, the calves humming like tired bees, the lower back trying on the martyrdom of saints, the shoulders petitioning for lighter loads tomorrow as if you can simply ask the forest to be generous. In the dark, humor feels easier. Joke 1. You tell your knees that you've filed their paid time off. They request retroactive approval. Joke 2. You promise the hornets from this afternoon that if they patrol your dreams, they must carry lanterns. Joke 3. You owe the dragonfly a tip for mosquito control. If it opens an apothecary, you'll be a loyal customer. You think of the men in the hollow and their twilight plans for buyers without ledgers. You think of the shrine stone on the bend and the pine cone you left there, of the elder's rice offering rule and how your 3 grains have become a quiet habit you'll likely never shake. You think briefly of the tiger shaped like a rumor moving between trees. And then you return to the day's small thesis. You went up. You came down. You did the work. You kept your name. The mountain will ask again tomorrow, because that's what mountains do, pose the same question in 100 different weathers. You won't always answer as well as you did today. You'll get tricked by a false 5-leaf. You'll chase a scent that belongs to partridgeberry. You'll dig a hole that collapses into wet laughter. Historians still argue whether the strictness saved the hills or starved the pickers, whether the ledgers preserved a treasure or simply caged it. You can't resolve that debate. You can only pull the quilt up, let the ondal heat reassure your spine, and whisper a promise to your own sore feet. We'll be smarter next time. Before sleep takes you, you send one last thought uphill to where the fog collects at dusk, a single grain's worth of gratitude. For the root that came out whole, for the boar that turned aside, for the hornets that stayed in their paper kingdom, for the rain that punished you and then, grudgingly, helped, and for the little red dot that says, without poetry but with certainty, you belong in the count. The room cools by slow degrees, and the edges of things soften until they seem to float in a shallow sea of shadow. Your breath falls into a longer rhythm, a rise and a fall that matches the river beyond the willows, a steady hush that asks nothing and gives everything it has, time, and easy permission to drift. The weight in your legs loosens like rope uncoiled, the small bristles of worry smoothing one by one until the thought of tigers and ledgers and weather becomes just a dim, harmless pattern fading on the inside of your eyelids. The floor's warmth spreads outward, gentle and certain, and you let it carry you the way a quiet boat carries the night. No hurry, no shore to reach, just the soft glide that turns wakefulness into rest. The day steps back, then farther still, as if it's closing a door without a sound. A little breeze finds its way under the eaves, touches your hair like cool water, and slips away again. If there are footsteps outside, they're only the thoughts of leaves rearranging themselves, choosing a softer place to lie. If there are voices, they're the low conversation of beams and tiles settling into comfort, speaking the language of houses that have watched 1,000 evenings descend and will watch 1,000 more. Every small ache becomes a reminder that you moved through a deep, green world and returned with exactly what you needed, enough. So let the last scraps of wakefulness float to the surface and dissolve, like mist rising from the fields at first light. Let the river keep time for you. Let the willows do the counting. The mountain is far away now, and nearer than ever, folded into your breath, easy and slow, steady and sure. Sleep comes on quiet feet, and when it arrives, it brings the softest answer to every hard question of the day. Rest, now, and be held. Sweet dreams.